Many of you have already been following the work I've been doing restoring arcade machines, and many of you already knew about my involvement in the Time Rift Arcade. And despite what my Wikipedia page says, something about quitting YouTube for a job he took at a local arcade in Bedford, Texas, well, that's not exactly accurate, so I wanted to tell you the real story of the arcade. It started kind of as a result of building the Pesky Robots arcade and placing it at the Electric Starship arcade in Haltom City, Texas. After my brother and I met Mike Woods, the owner of that arcade, we had started talking about the possibility of opening a second location. And so after several meetings with Mr. Woods, that's exactly what we set out to do. So the three owners of the arcade would be Mike Woods, myself, and my brother. So I know sometimes on social media I've seen people refer to the Time Rift as the 8-Bit Guys arcade, and while that isn't technically wrong, it's also not exactly true either. I'm just one of three partners on this, but we've all invested huge amounts of time and money into this venture. So work actually began back in May of 2022, about 2.5 years ago, when we bought our first truck full of arcade machines. All of these needed restoration work, but I ended up making a video about the moon-based cocktail table because I thought it would be an easy restore, but it ended up not being. And while I eventually got it working, there's a certain irony about this game as well. You may or may not ever see it at the arcade. So one thing I didn't consider at the time was how space inefficient cocktail tables are, because you need access to the front and the back and preferably at least one side. And so they need to go up against a wall where they can get power or at least have power drop from the ceiling or whatever. But point is, we have like 5 cocktail tables that we've restored now. But the reality is we really only have space for like maybe one on the floor. And right now that's the Nintendo Red Tent. For the first 1.5 years, we continued to work on arcade restorations in the background. I wasn't really making videos about this and wasn't talking about the arcade publicly at that point. It wasn't until about 1 year ago we started up the Time Rift YouTube channel and started to produce videos. It was also around this time we were searching for a building. So we actually looked at 10 or 11 different locations and actually attempted to lease many of these and ran into all kinds of little technical difficulties. For example, some places wouldn't allow us to sell alcohol there. Some places wanted us to install a really expensive grease trap, even though we don't even need one for our business. And then there were issues like there were strip malls that we looked at where one of the big anchor stores would flat out reject us and say, nope, we don't want any arcades in our strip mall because that uses up too much parking or something like that. In the end, we settled on this space in Bedford, Texas, which is relatively central to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I believe the space used to be a gym of some kind. We started negotiations with the landlord in January, and then we had to clear everything with the city council, and then we spent the next month or two dealing with dozens of various permits from the state, county, and the city. Every joke you've ever seen about how slow, unkind, or unnecessarily complex the government can be, well, they all came true. There were also multiple issues with the building that the landlord had to fix before we could take possession, including several water leaks. So some time went by while they worked on that, and we finally started work in April of 2024. Okay, I'm here at the Time Rift, and it is just a matter of minutes before the first construction crews actually arrive to start doing some demo and getting things going. We've actually had this building for months, and we simply haven't been able to start work yet due to all the normal types of bureaucracy and stuff that you have to deal with the business. So I'm really excited to actually see something about to actually happen. So there were originally 2 sets of restrooms. Because this unit is 2 smaller units combined, and we didn't really need 4 restrooms, so the smaller ones are going to get demolished, and larger ones are going to get totally stripped down and remodeled. The demo crew let me use the sledgehammer on one of the sinks. I was shocked at how easily it broke, but also how loud it was. There it is. Anyway, work continued on both restrooms. These 2 toilets were going away as well. I was tempted to sledgehammer those too, but I didn't want to add any additional mess for them to clean up. And we had quite a pile of junk building up in the corner. A couple of weeks went by and then the framing began. And I'm very familiar with framing for residential homes, but I've never had any experience with these aluminum studs before. The framers had this really cool nail gun they let me try. And the thing's got some kick to it. Anyway, this is the party room they're building here, and when we were designing this room, we purposely lined up the wall with this pole so it wouldn't be in the middle of the floor. And here we are about a month into construction, and it's time to start the electrical work, and we also have the frame up for the kitchen, and many of our plumbing fixtures have arrived, such as sinks and toilets. And one thing we wanted to do was raise this part of the ceiling because we knew we would have some tall games, and we can't raise the whole ceiling because the HVAC units and the ducting. We were on site pretty much every day to monitor construction and help the contractors better understand what we were needing to build. Here's the kitchen, making some progress. The plumbers had to cut the concrete to move some drain pipes around. Same for the bathrooms. Since this used to be a gym, the bathrooms each had a shower and a toilet, but we didn't need the showers, so the drains needed to be moved. Skipping forward a bit, here's the party room and a quick look at the tech room. At some point in the future, this will be filled with workbenches, tools, and equipment for repairing everything that we need. While the ceiling was all torn apart like this, I wanted to take the opportunity to solve another problem. Look at all these old cables hanging everywhere. I even found some old Cat 3 cables. These haven't been used since the early 1990s because it could only handle up to 10 megabit Ethernet. Anyway, me and Ashton spent several days during the middle of summer without any air conditioning, pulling out all of the old cables from the ceiling. I believe the reason there were so many of them is because each business that occupied this spot would run their own cables but then leave the old ones there, so it just accumulated over time. I found some interesting things up in the ceiling, such as this old Centronic style printer cable. That's probably been there since the 1990s. I have also no idea what this old strobe light was for, but we don't need that anymore. Also, I have no idea why there was this gigantic plastic tarp up there. Oh, and I think I found this siren that probably went along with the flashing light. And I also found an old Ever-Ready flashlight. I think I had one like this back in the 1990s. I think it's safe to say the batteries are dead, but let's have a look at them.
Oh, lovely. I'll breathe that in.
Anyway, we ended up making quite a pile of old cables. I'm glad none of this junk will be up there going forward. So we had this crew come in and put floor sealer on the concrete, but they were not able to scrape off this glue that was left over from the previous tenant. This stuff is almost like concrete itself. So the next day they brought in this propane-powered machine, and it had no problem eating away all of the glue. And for the first time, we could see actual concrete. So finally we could get the floor properly mopped, and then they could spray on the sealer. And by the way, you could smell this stuff a block away for like 3 days. It was that strong, but here it is, all done. Next, the plumber started to install the various fixtures in the restroom as well as our water fountains. The 2 mics used masking tape to mark where we wanted the bar to be built. And the contractors were installing FRP on the walls of the kitchen and the lower half of the restroom. Our kitchen sink has arrived. A few days later, they installed the stalls in the bathroom and, of course, the rails for ADA compliance. I know it seems weird to show restrooms, but the reality is almost everyone that comes to the arcade will eventually visit one of these rooms, so they're pretty important. A few days later, the pony wall for the bar was built, so the way this is planned to work is the customers will walk in the front door here, come up to the bar where they'll pay the entrance fee and get a wristband and so forth. Anyway, a few days later, we have drywall on the pony wall, and we're getting ceiling tiles installed in the raised area. And just kind of doing a similar walk-in, you can see already things are looking different. There is also this old foam on the back wall, which is probably there because the wall is concrete and doesn't insulate well, but we need to remove it as it's in bad shape. However, it's glued on pretty strong, so we all worked on this for a few hours until it was gone. Here we are in August, 4 months after construction began, and it's finally time to paint. The painters are prepping everything by essentially masking off anything that should not be painted, including the entire floor of the building. And here comes the primer. You may be wondering why they're spraying the ceiling. Well, we wanted to have black ceiling tiles, but I think the best deal I could find on those was about $6,000. It only cost around $1,000 to have the white ones we already have painted black. So that's what we did. In order to get the vibe we were looking for, that of a real arcade, we wanted basically everything to be black. Finally, at this point, it was time for us to come in and start adding our own equipment. And to get started, we needed an equipment rack of some kind, and we decided to mount that in the office room corner. And this is the mount for the battery backup. Also, one of the fun projects I started on was rebuilding some light fixtures. So we had a lot of these antique fluorescent lights, and many of them were failing or completely dead. And so I wanted to replace the bulbs with direct wire LED, so that means having to remove the ballast and rewire everything.
So my thinking was it takes like 10 minutes to replace the fluorescent tubes, or I can spend like 30 minutes and completely retrofit it for LED, and then I never have to mess with it again. So originally I thought this was going to be like retrofitting like 4 or 5 of these fixtures, but then almost every day that we came in and turned the lights on, a new fixture had failed. And so I think we have 62 fixtures in the place, and I think I've already retrofitted somewhere around 30 of them.
Moving along, it was time to set up workbenches in the tech room. Again, it was in the middle of August and we still didn't have any air conditioning yet, so we're just dripping with sweat. This room started to take a bit of a priority because we really needed at least one area to put all the tools and stuff we needed to work.
Up until that point, I'd been bringing like every tool that I needed from home, but inevitably I'd wind up running to the hardware store 2 or 3 times a day to grab some tool or some part or something that I didn't have.
The electricians were finally installing the ceiling outlets. So these are all on a special breaker, and all of the arcade machines will be run from these outlets. That way we can make sure that there's only a few machines on each circuit, so there's no overloads, and it also makes it easy to turn on and off all of the machines. August 16th was a wonderful day. What you're looking at here are the old air conditioners. All 4 of these units were dead. They had seized compressors and no refrigerant in them, and because they were so old, they were considered non-repairable. So we got 4 brand new units installed on the roof, and that meant we finally had air conditioning. Believe me when I say that helped our productivity a lot. For example, one of the things we had been doing was trying to run network cables and speaker cables, and it was so hot before that I could only manage a couple of hours before giving up for the day. And even after we got the AC turned on, it still took a couple of weeks to get all of the cables run that we needed. So this jack I'm installing here is for the Xbox and PlayStation behind the bar, but we also had Wi-Fi access points, cash registers, cameras, TVs, etc. Unfortunately, I didn't make it in time to film the crew hanging the front sign, but here it is in all of its glory. Likewise, it was time to install the logo and the information on the front door. This did have the side effect of drawing in a lot of potential customers to the doors every day, only to find that we weren't open yet. So moving into September, we were still a ways from opening, but it was time to start transporting some of the arcade machines on site, and it would take many more truckloads to get them all brought in. So this would be a regular thing for the next 2 months. I mean, we just piled them in the center of the floor for the time being, as we still had a lot of work to do in the ceiling still. We finally have the bar built out, but it's pretty barren at the moment. We have something pretty special in mind for this, which you'll see shortly, but right now this is mostly just prep work. And it was also time to bring in all the kitchen gear. We were a little concerned if some of these large items would make it through the doors, but they did, just barely. As these are the drink coolers for behind the bar.
All right, this is something we have no idea. Well, I have no idea what I'm doing. Mike knows what he's doing.
I have
but
no idea what I'm doing. That's fine.
we have got this beautiful vinyl on the bar, and we are going to cover it with some amount of epoxy. We're not sure exactly how thick, but I'm scared to death and my anxiety is at an all-time high, but here we go.
All right, UV bucket B.
All right.
If you pour them in there together and then empty them out, but don't misfire here. And they'll kind of mix at the same time. It's all nice. See,
And so we began pouring the epoxy on the bar and let it settle and level out. Mike used a blowtorch to help get the bubbles out. Unfortunately, one problem we had was we had the doors open earlier in the day when the kitchen equipment was delivered, and that let in a bunch of flies, and they were attracted to the smell of the epoxy. We had to keep digging them out. But it turned out pretty nice. It did take a couple of days to totally cure. We bought all of our tables and chairs from another arcade across town that had partially burned down, so that's why all of our tables are going to say TNT on them. I'll just tell people it stands for Teenage Ninja Turtles or something, but yeah, these filled up the entire box truck. Next, it was time to bring in even more games. Pitfall 2 is one of the little gems I'm proud that we have, and as you can see, we've started to organize the games into rows now, starting to look like an arcade. Oh, and here comes the game that nobody else has, but I'm sure all of you guys have seen before, my Petsky Robots arcade machine. So here's a little glimpse through time of what a typical day was like during the weeks leading up to opening. Mike is assembling a pinball game. My wife Leslie is assembling furniture for the party room. Oliver and Andy are working on bringing in and setting up machines. And one thing we have to do is degauss a lot of these machines after they sat in storage for a while. Now, one nice thing about setting up new pinball machines is, well, they have to be tested. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. Okay, so we're just a couple of weeks away from opening, so let's have a look around. It looks almost finished in this walkthrough, but there's still a ton of little minor details to be sorted out that maybe aren't obvious. But anyway, here's our YouTube subscriber count for the Time Rift Arcade. It's actually much higher than that already. I was hoping to hit 100K by the end of the year. Here's a look in the kitchen, and while all the appliances and stuff are here, we don't have any food stock yet in place. Here's our pinball alley. Here's our Nintendo Red Tent and multiplayer Pac-Man. Of course, everyone needs an air hockey table. This is our row of 80s games, and this is sort of a row of 90s games. And this is like Pac-Man Central with all the different kinds of Pac-Man games, including the Baby Pac-Man I did a restoration video on. This area here will be for our vintage computers and consoles like Commodore, Nintendo, Atari, Sega, and so on. Back here is various racing games, shooter games, and here's one of my personal favorites, Pitfall 2. Anyway, it's all coming together. One of my many decorative projects that I had in mind was to make Tetris wall art. So we took some MDF and cut them into squares, chamfered the edges, and painted them. I'm basically using industrial double-sided tape to stick them to the walls. So this is in the bathrooms, actually, and I think it looks pretty cool, and I plan to add some more decorations similar to this. It's kind of a serene feeling looking around the arcade before we open the following morning. What you don't see in this video is what's happening in our office room. So here we are in the middle of the night. It is literally, we're planning on opening the arcade in the morning, first time ever, and we have a giant hole with plumbers digging holes under our bathrooms. Unfortunately, a matter of days before we opened, our bathrooms backed up and we found that we had a broken cast iron sewer pipe under the foundation. It took a few days to find some plumbers that could fix it, and these guys were great, and they worked on this nearly 24 hours straight all through the night to get this fixed. I had set up a little cot in the party room so we could take naps occasionally, as we would have to stay here throughout the entire night with the plumbers. They had to tunnel some 30 feet under the concrete in order to replace the pipe, but amazingly, by 10 o'clock the next morning, they had already patched up the concrete. Of course, all the employees were on a mad dash to get the place back in order and clean all the dust off of everything. And the next morning, we opened for business. This was supposed to be a friends and family soft opening starting at 3 o'clock, but we had a number of glitches and issues come up during our soft opening, but that was really the whole idea anyway. Overall, everything went pretty well. I was especially happy to see people playing with the vintage computer area set up. And we'd spend the next few days repairing all of the machines that broke down during the soft opening. And our official opening day to the general public would be 4 days later on Wednesday, October 23rd. Some of the more rare machines that we have would be this Atari Force Liberator. There weren't many of these made. And perhaps more interesting is that our Donkey Kong machine was donated by Jace Hall of Twin Galaxies. This is the very machine used in the court battle with Billy Mitchell. I was happy to see that my vintage console area and my vintage computer area have both been big hits with customers. I have multi-carts in all of these machines, so if you just reset them, you get a menu where you can pick almost any game ever made for them. Even the computers all have something similar, such as the penultimate cartridge on the VIC-20, and we made a custom menu for the MS-DOS computer, which I think has probably been the most popular. And I've seen people playing Lemmings and King's Quest and Duke Nukem and Doom and really just about all kinds of games on there. The Atari 2600 even gets a decent amount of playtime. I saw somebody playing Adventure the other day, and when they walked away, they left a little Easter egg screen up there, so I bet they learned that from Ready Player One. The Apple II is sort of a problem because everybody wants to play Oregon Trail, but unfortunately the game requires flipping the disc at some point, and being we don't have a real disk drive, I can't offer that, so I'm looking for a solution to that problem. So let me show you the tech room. This is where we're doing most of the repairs. We already have a few machines in here that have broken down. And while I'll probably be spending most of my time in here, I really have to be able to do every job at the arcade, including serving people drinks, or even making food in the kitchen. Whatever it is that needs to be done.
So if you've watched this far, I thought, hey, I should probably answer a couple of questions that are inevitably going to come up. First question is, people are probably going to ask is, does this mean you're quitting YouTube? The answer is a resounding no. I actually plan on doing quite a bit more YouTube, both on this channel and the Time Rift Arcade YouTube channel. Admittedly, I've been spending like 7 days a week up at the arcade for the last few months, so I haven't been able to get a lot of YouTube stuff done, but that should change pretty quick because once we get things running really smoothly, we've got some really great employees. And I think they should be able to run the arcade most of the time without me having to be there. So I plan on being there like maybe 2 or 3 days out of the week. Which brings us to the next question people are going to probably ask, which is, I'm coming by the arcade, when will you be there? I really don't know for sure. The best thing you can do is email me directly, and I usually know a couple of days in advance if I'm going to be at the arcade or not. But anyway, I think that wraps it up for this episode. So as always, thanks for watching.